On the morning of February 7, 1968, the ground at Lang Vey began to shake. Not from mortars, they had learned what mortars felt like. This was different. This was something moving through the wire. 14 Green Berets and 400 Montagnard fighters were about to face something no American unit in the entire Vietnam War had faced before. Soviet-built PT-76 tanks, 11 of them punching straight through the perimeter with their engines wide open, NVA infantry running behind them in the dark. There was no contingency plan for this. There was no call sign for tanks. There was no one coming to help. They didn't have weapons that could reliably stop a PT-76 at close range. They didn't have armor of their own. The Marines at Khe Sanh, less than 8 miles away, refused to send reinforcements. And the NVA commander who ordered that attack went to bed certain he had ended the fight before sunrise. By dawn, 7 of those 11 tanks had been destroyed. The camp was overrun, but the NVA had not broken the Americans. They had walked into something they were not prepared for. The Green Berets of Detachment A1, a one fought with weapons they weren't supposed to need, held positions that were supposed to be indefensible, and removed at least 200 NVA soldiers from the fight permanently. What happened at Lang Vey was the first tank assault against American forces in the entire Vietnam War. It lasted less than 8 hours. It was never properly explained by the Pentagon. And the men who survived it, Montagnard allies and U.S. Army Special Forces together, were left to face it almost entirely alone. Lang Vey sat in the westernmost corner of Quang Tri Province, less than 3 miles from the Laotian border. It wasn't a glamorous assignment. Camp A1, A1 had been built to support the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program, CIDG, training and leading Montagnard fighters who had no allegiance to Saigon but fierce loyalty to the Green Berets who had lived alongside them for years. The camp's job was to watch the Ho Chi Minh Trail, monitor border infiltration, and hold ground that the NVA preferred not to have watched. By early 1968, that ground had become critical. The NVA's general offensive, what history would call the Tet Offensive, was already 2 weeks into unfolding across South Vietnam. Khe Sanh Combat Base was under siege 8 miles to the east. The eyes of the American military and every news camera in the country were pointed there. Lang Vey, as a result, was an afterthought. That was exactly what the NVA counted on. If this is your first time watching Vietnam War Memoirs, this is what we do here. Every episode is a story the official history passed over, told the way the men who fought it deserve to have it told. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The algorithm won't always put these in your feed, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Now back to Lang Vey, because what happened next is the part nobody talks about. The NVA unit tasked with taking Lang Vey was the 304th Division, one of the most experienced and battle-hardened divisions in the North Vietnamese Army. And they were bringing with them something no American unit in Vietnam had yet encountered in direct combat. The PT-76, a Soviet amphibious light tank capable of crossing rivers without bridging equipment, fast enough to keep pace with infantry, and armored well enough to absorb small arms fire and most light anti-tank weapons at the distances inside a fire-based perimeter. NVA commanders believed, and they had reason to, that no special forces detachment in a forward camp had the equipment or the training to stop an armored assault. That assumption was almost correct. Captain Frank Willoughby commanded Detachment A101. He was 31 years old, on his second tour in Vietnam, and had spent enough time in that corner of the war to understand the difference between intelligence reports that meant something and those that didn't. In the days before February 7th, Willoughby had received multiple reports from CIDG reconnaissance teams and Laotian irregulars. Tracked vehicle movement, heavy equipment sounds at night, large unit consolidation just across the border. He sent the reports up the chain. The response was consistent. The enemy did not have armor in that sector. The terrain wouldn't support tracked vehicles. Willoughby kept his doubts to himself. He quietly inventoried every M72 Law light anti-tank weapon his detachment had access to. There weren't many, there never are. At 11:30 p.m. on February 6th, the NVA opened with a mortar barrage. Lang Vey had been mortared before, routine enough that some CIDG fighters didn't immediately come off their cots. This barrage was different. It was heavier, more precise, and it walked systematically across the camp's defensive positions in a pattern designed to suppress, not harass. Then Specialist John Early, manning one of the observation posts at the outer perimeter, made a radio call nobody in the camp was prepared to hear. "I've got tracks, multiple tracks. They're inside the wire." The first PT-76 came through the outer defensive wire, then a second, then a third. The NVA had not preceded the armor with a probe. They had sent the tanks directly through the wire as the assault element, relying on speed, shock, and the simple psychological fact that most soldiers, when they see a tank coming at them in the dark, stop fighting. The Green Berets didn't stop. Staff Sergeant James Holt took the first M72 Law he could reach and fired it at the lead tank's side skirt at less than 30 meters. The rocket struck. The tank didn't stop. PT-76s were built for exactly this kind of punishment. The M72 Law's 66 warhead was designed for older Soviet armor. At close range it could penetrate. At an angle against a moving vehicle in the dark, the first shot was a wound, not a kill. Holt picked up a second Law. He fired again. This time the tank stopped. Across the camp, in the command bunker, Willoughby was on the radio to Marine headquarters at Khe Sanh. The conversation would later become one of the most argued exchanges of the entire siege period. He was asking for reinforcements. He was told the Marines would not send infantry into a nighttime tank engagement at Lang Vey. They had their own perimeter to defend. Willoughby acknowledged the transmission, set down the handset, and went back to the fight. What no official account fully captured was the role of the Montagnard CIDG fighters in those hours. These were men the U.S. military had trained, equipped with M2 carbines and older weapons, and embedded in a camp the Pentagon considered expendable if Khe Sanh held. They had no reason to stay. The tanks were coming through their fighting positions. Several CIDG soldiers were killed in the first 20 minutes not by gunfire, but by tank treads. They stayed, almost all of them stayed. By 02:00 hours, the NVA had overrun the outer perimeter and 3 of the camp's forward fighting positions. They had lost 2 tanks to Law fire and 1 to a CIDG fighter who dropped a satchel charge directly onto an engine deck as the vehicle rolled over his trench, a moment that multiple survivors described consistently in after-action interviews. The command bunker became the last organized position. Willoughby had 11 men with him, American and Vietnamese special forces together. In a reinforced structure, the NVA tanks were now attempting to collapse by driving over it and reversing, using the tank's own weight as a battering ram. At 02:30, Willoughby finally got what he had been requesting for 2 hours: tactical air support. An Air Force AC-47 gunship, Spooky, arrived on station and began working the outer approaches, cutting off NVA infantry from reinforcing the tanks already inside the wire. This was the shift the defenders needed. Without continuous infantry support, the PT-76s were isolated. Tanks in a fortified environment without infantry cover are not invincible. They are exposed. The Green Berets understood this. They came out of the bunker. What followed was close-quarters fighting that doesn't appear in any tactical manual. Men moving through a burning camp in the dark, using every Law round they could find, targeting tank optics, tracks, and engine vents. Sergeant First Class Eugene Ashley Jr., who had been outside the perimeter when the attack began and had fought his way back through NVA lines to reach the camp, led 4 separate relief attempts into the overrun position. He was wounded twice. He refused evacuation. On his 5th attempt, he was killed by enemy fire less than 50 meters from the command bunker. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. He was 36 years old. By first light on February 7th, the NVA had effectively controlled Lang Vey for approximately 4 hours. 7 of the 11 tanks had been destroyed or disabled. NVA casualties inside and around the perimeter were later estimated at between 200 and 300 killed. The camp was physically overrun, but the NVA paid a price for it that their operational commanders had not budgeted for. NVA after-action analysis, portions of which were later captured and translated, revealed a consistent acknowledgement. The resistance of the Special Forces Detachment and the CIDG fighters had been stronger than anticipated, and the effectiveness of individual anti-armor weapons had exceeded assessment models. That is military bureaucratic language for, we didn't think 14 Americans and 400 Montagnard fighters could do that with law rockets and satchel charges. They had estimated the camp would fall in under 2 hours. It took 8, and cost them armor they couldn't easily replace in that sector. Captured NVA documents later showed their commanders had classified the Lang Vey engagement as a tactical anomaly, a polite way of saying they had no explanation for what happened. The armor doctrine they had relied on, tested in exercises and studied from Soviet manuals, had no answer for what those men did that night. Do you think the NVA ever figured out why it went wrong? Tell us what you think below, and if your father or someone you knew served in I Corps in early '68, drop a comment. These stories deserve to be heard in full. The survivors were extracted on the morning of February 7th and taken to Khe Sanh, the same base that had refused to send reinforcements the night before. Willoughby received the Silver Star. Several CIDG fighters received no formal recognition at all. They were not U.S. citizens, not in the American chain of command, and the paperwork for their service exists only in fragments. For the NVA 304th Division, Lang Vey represented a tactical success and a strategic miscalculation. They had proven that PT-76 tanks could breach a Special Forces camp. What they had not proven was that armor alone could end the fight. The men inside that camp, American and Montagnard, had shown that dedicated infantry with the right weapons and the will to use them at point-blank range could gut an armored assault even without reinforcements, even without artillery, even without support from the Marines 8 miles away. The tanks never came back to Lang Vey. The NVA commanders knew why.